Now let's get into the anabolic pathways. So anabolism, the building up, serves vital purpose, nutrient storage, nutrient synthesis, structure of our body, synthesis of special molecules, these electron carriers, FAD and NAD. So the body stores nutrients for two different reasons. So if you eat more than you need, your body can store excess energy. We store fat. When the body needs nutrients to oxidize between meals, your body needs energy in between when you're not eating. We need to have nutrients stored up for that reason too. So when we have too much, or the body needs to have some in between meals, the body has to store nutrients for those two reasons. Two main nutrient stores are glycogen, which are just chains of glucose, and adipose fat, which are made mostly of triglycerides. So glucose anabolism. Glyconeogenesis and gluconeogenesis are two anabolic processes involving glucose. Glyconeogenesis, storage of excess glucose obtained from diet as glycogen, right? So your body stores excess glucose. Glycogen is a large chain of thousands of glucose molecules, right? Just put them in a large chain, series of enzyme catalyzed reactions, mostly in your hepatocytes and skeletal muscle fibers, in your liver and your skeletal muscles. Add glucose units to a large molecule. You also have gluconeogenesis, synthesis of glucose molecule from non-carbohydrates. So once glycogen supplies have been exhausted, the hepatocytes and specific kidney cells can convert 3 and 4 carbon compounds into glucose. So the glyconeogenesis is basically taking glucose molecules and just adding them on in a chain. Gluconeogenesis is taking molecules that are not carbohydrates and making new glucose molecules. All right, and this can happen from glycerol from the triglyceride. Remember, triglycerides are glycerol plus three fatty acid chains. You can take that glycerol, make glucose. From pyruvate and lactate, you can make glucose. And then you have other amino acids that you can use to make glucose. All right. This is just a picture of that. Glycogenesis, just adding on glucose molecules to a chain of glucose, which is called glycogen. And then you have the other gluconeogenesis. Different ways you can take non-carbohydrates and make glucose. Fatty acids, we have lipogenesis, process used to synthesize fatty acids. Takes place in the cytosol under the direction of fatty acid synthase, that's the enzyme, catalyzes reaction, progressively lengthens fatty acid chains, 2 carbons at a time. Same way it gets broken down, 2 carbons at a time, we lengthen it 2 carbons at a time. Most fatty acids are attached to glycerol and assembled into triglycerides in the endoplasmic reticulum and stored in adipocytes, which are fat cells. Right, so we just add 2 carbons at a time, make these long chains, stored in cells called adipocytes, which are fat cells. Majority of energy is stored as triglycerides in adipose tissue. Glycerol and fatty acids are derived from amino acids and glucose, not just from dietary sources. So excess glucose that is not stored as glycogen is converted to acetyl-CoA and then to fatty acids. Glycerol can be synthesized from other products of glycolysis. Excess amino acids are also converted into triglycerides. All right, so too much protein, too many carbohydrates can be converted into fat. Body converts it into fat. right? So basically, when we eat too much, your body converts it into fat, into triglycerides, very simply put. Amino acid anabolism. Body is capable of synthesizing 11 of the 20 amino acids. 9 of the 20 we have to eat, but the ones that we can make, synthesis involves reactions that add amino group to carbon skeleton, and that's how we synthesize amino acids. Right? And this is the big picture of nutrient anabolism. Right? Notice that we can take glucose, make glycogen, fatty acids, we can make fatty acids from glycerol, from amino acids, from all those we can make fat. And from amino acids, we can also build proteins. All right. Lastly, we're going to talk about metabolic states and regulation of feeding. All right, so metabolic states. The whole point of this is to make sure, and the whole point of all of this is to make sure we have the energy that we need to be able to function. Right. So the states differ in terms of their proximity to feeding, metabolic reactions that predominate. Right. So we have the absorptive state and the post-absorptive state. Right. Think of absorption, when we're absorbing nutrients. So that's when we're eating. Post-absorptive state when we're not. All right. So absorptive state right after we eat. This absorptive state is up to 4 hours. Remember the process we talked about starts in the mouth, down the esophagus, stomach, intestines, and stomach, intestines will really have the absorption into our bloodstream. So this process can last up to 4 hours following, and the following processes occur. Oxidation of nutrient molecules, glyconeogenesis stores excess glucose, we form glycagon, and that's in your skeletal muscles and your hepatocytes, your liver. Lipogenesis stores triglycerides, fat, and adipocyte and hepatocytes. Protein synthesis, right? We build proteins, and then we have pancreatic hormone insulin orchestrates many of these absorptive state processes. All right, so this is your absorptive state. So after you eat, your body's absorbing the nutrients, creating glycogen, fat, absorbing nutrients. Absorptive state. Right, post-absorptive state begins once nutrient absorption has completed. So after about 4 hours after you eat, this is why they say don't go swimming right away. It takes about 2 hours for food to get through your digestive system, but we say about 4 hours for the absorptive state because you're creating fat molecules, you're creating glycogen, you're creating all these things. So after about 4 hours after you eat, and this is why they say eat every 3 to 4 hours when you're doing like a lot of times like diets will say eat small meals, like eat every 3 to 4 hours. It takes about 4 hours for this to happen. At that point, you go into post-absorptive state. But if I were to eat again, I would always stay in absorptive state. Therefore, my metabolism, chemical reactions that are happening in my body would be higher. So that's why they say it boosts your metabolism when you eat every 3 to 4 hours, because your body is constantly in an absorptive state. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. So after about 4 hours, you go into what we call post-absorptive state, because the absorptive window has ended, body's usually in a state in late morning, late afternoon, most of the night. Your anabolic process is slow, so your building reactions slow or stop. You have the breakdown of proteins in the muscle, and muscle cells releases glucogenic amino acids in the blood. Ketogenesis, hepatocytes converts fatty acids to ketone bodies and releases them into blood. Gluconeogenesis, that means forming glucose from things that are not carbohydrates. Glycogenolysis releases glucose in the blood, sugar into your blood. Lipolysis releases fatty acids into your blood. All right, then we have oxidation of molecules. Fatty acids provides most cells with fuel during this post-absorptive state. Now, like I said, during your absorptive state, your metabolism is generally higher. But during this post-absorptive state, you're burning more fat. This is a reason your body's using more fat as energy. I put it like that. Your body's using more fat as energy. This is a reason why a lot of people they do fasting. So, for instance, people will take fasting for like non-religious purposes. So, for instance, people will say, well, I'm just going to eat breakfast and then not eat again until dinner, for instance. So your body's fasting a good portion of the day. Well, there's pros and cons to that. But one of the pros is that you burn off your carbohydrates, you use your carbohydrates, and then your body starts burning fat for a good portion of the day. Fatty acids provide most cells with the fuel. So you end up burning that. You kind of trick your body into burning more fat that way. So, but there's a lot of there's pros and cons to all of these. You do have glucose sparing. Cells catabolize newly delivered fatty acids to conserve glucose. Several hormones are at work. Pancreatic hormone glucagon triggers glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis in liver. Epinephrine and norepinephrine stimulate lipolysis, the breaking down of fat. And glucose in the skeletal muscles. And cortisol stimulates gluconeogenesis and processes that release glucogenic precursors into your blood, building up glucose. Right. So this all is happening during this post-absorptive stage. All right. This is just a diagram putting it all together. And here we're going to talk about fasting a little bit more. I mentioned it earlier. Fasting prolonged periods without food, basically, could be intentional. Unfortunately, there are people who are doing it unintentionally because they just don't have access to food. Like I said, your body can burn fat while you're fasting, but you also have some consequences. Like I also mentioned, one of the consequences is protein wasting. So after a few hours in the post-absorptive state, not eating, so you've absorptive state lasts 4 hours after you eat. After that, if you do a couple hours extra after that, you can actually go into protein wasting. So your body starts breaking down proteins. Remember, your muscles are made of proteins. A lot of the structure in your body is made up of proteins. But if you do that for a long period of time, it's not good for you. So your body can take part of its own structure, break it down, like for instance, break down muscle and use the carbon in that protein structure to give itself energy. All right. And it can use proteins from your heart, liver, and brain as well, as I mentioned here in the last point. All right, so that could potentially be fatal. That's generally when they say to do the fasting, they say intermittent fasting. So not for long periods of time because of this very consequence. Feeding, controlled by a variety of hormonal and neural signals, stimulate and or inhibit feeding-related nuclei in hypothalamus. So your hypothalamus houses two nuclei that control homeostatic. Remember, homeostasis, keeping everything constant. The homeostatic variables associated with feeding. Your satiety center elicits feelings of fullness, and your hunger center elicits feelings of hunger. Very simple. This is in your hypothalamus. Right? Long-term regulation, you have leptin, the hormone produced by the adipocytes, the fat cells, stimulates your satiety center, and therefore and inhibits your hunger center. You have this ghrelin, which hormone produced by stomach mucosal cells, stimulates neurons in the hunger center to promote hunger. That's why they say like your stomach is growling. Hunger center is also stimulated by drop in leptin levels, allows hunger center neurons to become activated. So your fat cells stimulate the fullness, that you're satisfied not to eat. The stomach stimulates, the stomach hormones stimulate that you're hungry. You also have insulin is released in response to feeding. Acts very similar to the leptin, which is by the adipocytes. Increases food intake, so very similar reaction. Feeding stretches your stomach walls, initiates release of that gastrointestinal hormone, the CCK. Both stimulate the vagus nerve to indirectly suppress your hunger center, right? So your stomach stretches, releases CCK. Insulin is released when you're eating as well. Both of those suppress your hunger center. So when you eat a lot, your stomach fills up, stretches everything. Now your body says, I'm no longer hungry, I'm full. Levels of certain molecules in blood can also stimulate or inhibit these hypothalamic centers. For example, low levels of glucose in the blood. When your blood sugar levels are low, you don't have enough glucose, which is energy. Remember, glucose is used for energy. When your blood doesn't have enough glucose in the blood, low levels of glucose in your blood stimulates you to, I'm hungry. You can actually, sometimes you can, I feel like you can feel it. You can feel like when your blood sugar is low, you feel like sometimes kind of, if it gets too low, kind of lightheaded. But that's just a sign that your blood sugar is low and you need to eat.